again, this is a new format, something we're trying, so let's see how it works. And if you want to say something, put it in the chat or unmute, and then we'll shepherd through and see how this works out. So thank you for joining us in this grand experiment, and we're now recording. And Michelle, it's all you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Michelle Gilbert. I'm from Minneapolis. I work at Microsoft, and my focus is on modern work and specifically Teams and Office 365. Today here, I'm going to share my screen out. I wanted to focus on a topic that we at, as I'm working with law firms, they're trying to figure out how to have guest access enabled and really understanding how do you federate? What does all of this mean? Joy, can you go ahead and confirm? Oh, all right, wrong screen sharing. So let me go ahead and stop my share, start again. There we are. Can you confirm?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is Microsoft 365 and Teams for legal slide is what I was seeing.
All right, let me do that one more time and just make sure. It looks like it's trying to move to my other screen. So just bear with me 1 second.
Well, here's where my incredible lack of sophistication, I will say, about multiple external peripherals is helpful, because I only have my laptop monitor. That's all I use. I don't even have an external monitor, so I don't have to worry about what I'm sharing. We're still seeing your slide, Michelle.
Okay, great. So, all right. So it says, good. I'm glad, because over here it actually shows I'm sharing the wrong screen. So Zoom, if you can't tell, is not my forte. So I will do my best in navigating through it. But really what I wanted to address today is how law firms can connect with clients using Teams, understanding best practices from a governance perspective. So I'm going to walk through understanding Teams' external communication and collaboration features. I want to define clarity for you around what does external mean, federating with domains, versus guest access, and that's using external identities. We're going to walk through Teams architecture, high level controls that you can put in place. Next week, Paul Edlin will really deep dive into those controls specifically. But what I wanted to give you is understanding of the authorization, authentication process for considering client access inside of your tenant, inside of Teams to best collaborate. But if you're not comfortable with that, how you can at least enable the chat and calling features within Federation. And then, of course, we're going to talk about how you can connect, do some co-authoring. I'm going to end with a demo. Joy, can you see the next slide where it says agenda?
I can, yep.
Okay, great.
And I just want to encourage people, one of the things that's going to make this really meaningful is use cases.
Right.
So Michelle's going to talk about some of the use cases she's been hearing as a member of Microsoft's V team when she does design sessions with customers, with large law firms. But I encourage you, that's part of this working group idea, to say, hey, but I have this use case. This is what my client is asking us to do. This is what our partner's asking us to do. And that's going to be part of the real value of this conversation. So please, please jump in with those kinds of questions specifically about use cases and how would we accommodate this use case, because I think that's going to be really valuable.
Right. And so, I mean, stop me at any point. I've got a lot of slides, but this is really about discussion, education, discussion on your own use cases, and the enablement process. And then, of course, showing you what would that experience look like in a demo environment if you were to invite, for instance, a client into your tenant versus just wanting to connect and have a chat with them. So this is really, if you haven't seen this slide, this is really a kind of a 4-phased process, a prescriptive approach of really how to move in the enablement process of the journey to Microsoft 365 and Teams for law firms. This is really carefully considering all the different data and privacy considerations or concerns that you may have. And the focus area for today is really on the third part. And, the third part is not necessarily what is a template for you to use. I have firms today that are using the first portion, which is the enablement portion, but they need to enable federation as well because their attorneys are asking for it. So if you can see their federation with select partners, clients, and so forth for external chat capabilities, that could even be partner counsel or outside counsel. Then we have external and guest access. So bringing those clients into a specific team and into a channel to enable file collaboration, have them be able to upload documents in a secure location that is really governed by you. So that's what I'm going to walk through today. So the focus for this section is really just talking about the architecture overview. And I'm going to go through much of this quickly because I don't know where each of you are at in the journey to understanding M365 and Teams. But really, I want to talk about a new modern way that I am seeing firms work today. And really, it all starts out with a team of people and a team of people that need to do things efficiently by co-authoring, whether that's internal together as a practice group or external with their clients or other counsel. And then being able to manage your tasks and being able to have really a more efficient way to plan, be able to have analytics or reporting on maybe your time billing or your client matter billing and so forth. And you may need to connect through video, being able to enable the experience that we're not behind a closed door. We're turned on, we're connecting to each other. Along with that, having audio, video, and screen sharing, much like I'm doing here today, being able to dial into a meeting or so forth if your internet is down and you're on vacation, and also utilizing bots to be able to maybe do an expertise lookup within Teams to find out who has a specialty or niche in a certain area. Continuing on, being able to easily chat, have conversations in real time, whether that's through one-to-one or one-to-many in a group chat. Continuing that, being able to have maybe these large, maybe you may not call it town halls within a firm, but being able to all get together, connect, and learn maybe who the new associates are that are being onboarded, and having more connectedness throughout the firm. Being able to easily do note taking, do a workflow, making things more efficient for approvals, and of course, bringing in your legal applications, your third line, I guess, business line applications within one central location, working on your own files, scheduling your own or managing your own schedule, working in your customer relationship management system, all of that being able to have security overlaid with one global membership that has compliance, analytics and insights, security, integration, and of course, being able to access this mobily is really the modern way that we are seeing teams of people and firms wanting to work. And we call that using Microsoft Teams, the hub for teamwork. So what we've done, in the past years, if you've been utilizing things like Skype and Exchange, that there's been this, I guess, different products that are focused on different things. We have SharePoint for collaboration. You have Exchange for email. All of these things have been fantastic, but what we have never had is a single dashboard that's going to integrate and put all of these things together. So if you're to think of Teams, Teams is your front face, but it's powered by Exchange and it's powered by SharePoint. And yes, it's stored and living inside of our Office 365 cloud. So if you're not familiar with Teams at all, just a real high level, this is the ability to communicate. So if you're looking for ability to chat, call easily, have meetings, you can do that through the communication pillar. Then we have the collaboration pillar, bringing SharePoint into the system along with Office Pro Plus, so you can work on your files simultaneously through co-authoring. Then customizing, much like I mentioned, the legal application portion, being able to bring in those applications like an iManage app to be able to connect inside of Teams. So you're reducing context switching as you're going from one different system to another, to another, to another, which we all know when we do that, we lose track of what we're doing. And really Microsoft's taken a stance to make it more efficient. And then last but not least, of course, is just working with confidence, knowing that we do have all the security layers we've been building for years that in SharePoint and Exchange already, on top of everything that you're being able to communicate and collaborate with. So again, architecturally, the foundation of Microsoft Teams really is on systems and M365 technologies that we've already had for years and years. Exchange, SharePoint, Azure, this concept called Microsoft 365 groups. That's a whole new construct. Just leaning into that just a little bit to talk to you about, that's about identity. And when you create a group, it's not like your on-prem security groups or even your Azure security group. It is like an Azure security group, but it lights up all these services. So when you create a Microsoft team, as a matter of fact, you get a SharePoint site, you get a Exchange mailbox, you get a planner plan, you can get a OneNote document or a OneNote notebook that lives inside of SharePoint. So you really get this is your front end view, but this gives you architecturally an overview of when you have teams, you actually have a modern group that lights up these services. And when you remove a team, you actually remove all those other services connected to it. So when creating a team, this is all the items that I just mentioned that you get. It is a chat-based workspace. Behind that, though, is a file system that connects to SharePoint. It is also a mailbox and a calendar system for your group that's living in Exchange. So these are all the different things that you do get within Microsoft Teams. And this is really whether you are on-prem or in your Exchange environment, or if you're hybrid, you may want your mailboxes to remain on-prem. You still get that capability and that integration to do federation with your clients, to also do presence and being able to see when people are available to be able to have that conversation with them. So real quick, creating a team, there's just a couple of things to know. You can create it brand new from scratch or create a team from an existing group that you've already created. And then of course you have templates. And so driving into kind of the discussion today is I wanted to give you this first background to understand architecturally what is a team and what is an Office 365 group that makes up the team. And then how are you going to interact with, as attorneys are asking for, hey, I need to connect and join this team's meeting, or I got invited to this team to be able to collaborate. So let me show you, these are the different participation or participant types that you're going to see inside of Teams. You have an internal user, which is really all of us today if we're using Teams. I come in, I log in, and I'm up and running. But there are other circumstances that you are going to want to connect, whether you are creating a meeting. And if I were to create a Teams meeting and invite all of you today, you're going to join what's called anonymously. So you're doing this without a Teams account. You don't have to sign up for anything. You basically click a join button, or you could dial in, and using a client or even a browser or even a Teams app, you can go ahead and make those VoIP calls, if you will. There's another type. We used to call it federation. It's now called just external user. Terminology is really key here to just understand, because when you say things, that changes the way it may interact and the way a client may be coming in. So it's clear that, or it's important that we understand these. An external user is a user, and I'm going to get into details here, that they can call, they can chat, or they can join a meeting using an organization account. What this means is that they already are using Microsoft Teams in Microsoft 365 at their location, at their company. And when they are in there, they can actually look you up and message you. They're not going into your tenant, you are in separate locations, but they can be able to communicate to you without leaving their Teams environment. Now, the difference there between external user and guest user is that guest user, they join a Teams using a guest account. So what this means is that if they want to go ahead and connect to you and work with you on a file, they actually have to change their tenant, which tenant just means your enterprise subscription. All your organization members that are licensed are inside of a tenant. So they would have to actually change from their client location, for instance, into your law firm's tenant. And so they do that switching, and then you can put layers of security on what they can do, what they can see, how deep they can go, what they can access, what they can't access, and that's all auditable. So that's at a high level, but let's talk about anonymous access real quick. It really means that users are not authenticated to your organization tenant whatsoever. With the join, anyone can join a meeting by just clicking the link, like I mentioned. But what if I don't want anonymous access in a Teams meeting? If you do not want anonymous access in the Teams Admin Center, you can turn that off. And basically what that means is you will not be able to have a Teams meeting with anyone outside of your organization unless they are a guest. So that would basically be like we're turning off having meetings with anyone outside of the firm. So configuring that in the Teams Admin Center under meeting settings, you can go ahead and turn off anonymous join or even restrict them from using applications, for instance, like a Word document or polling or so forth. So now we understand a little bit of the architecture and anonymous access. Let's get into what is external access. So external access is where you need a solution that lets users in other domains find, call, chat, and set up meetings with you. External users have no access to your data. They cannot even get into Teams because this does not give them permission or authentication to come into your environment. This only allows you to actually just see presence, easily chat with them while they're in their own tenant. This is turned on by default. But what if you don't want guests in Teams? Or what if you want guests in Teams? Then you would want to enable these guest access or external identities to add, regardless of your domain, where they can call, chat, meet. The key here, the difference between external and guest is about collaboration. They are actually intentionally coming into your environment to connect with you, work on files with you, have maybe channel meetings with you. So this is where files are stored in SharePoint or OneDrive. So these are cloud files using M365 apps for business. That's actually formerly Office 365 Pro Plus. Those are Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And a guest user can nearly be given the same amount of capabilities as a native team member. So walking through just a little bit more around external access. That lets you, your team, and Skype for Business users, if you have clients that are still using that, or if you're doing that, Federation's been around for a while. This is where you can allow these groups of individuals communicate without connecting through any other means. So users can do chat, call, meeting using their, we call home tenant profile, meaning that I'm not leaving my area of work to connect. So this to me is a lot like we are opening the ability to call this person, you know, the old desk phone where you pick it up and you're not blocking anyone from calling anyone. So that's what I think of as Federation. I'm just giving you another outlet to be able to communicate and use chat and meetings. So there's no need to switch tenants, and you can't, you're not going into somebody else's organization. So this gives you the ability outside of your organization to simply make that phone call or that chat that you normally allow, whether if they're using this Federation. And this is all can be configured on a per domain basis. Really what I mean by domain is you can say, I'm only allowing these 3 organizations to connect to my law firm. And we're just only going to take this by request and enable by domain. You can lock it down pretty far, and I'll talk to that in just a second. So this is just external access interop, the ability for teams to come in through Office 365. The first one on the left there, you have tenant A. So this is, for instance, your law firm, and tenant B, for instance, could be your client. They have to use Teams or Skype for Business to connect to you using this federation. Again, they're not leaving their organization, they're just having a chat. And then if you haven't heard, back in November, we rolled out what's called Teams for Life. That is a consumer product. Currently, right now, we don't have a capability. If a client does have a Teams for Life license or a Teams for Life, it's a free version of Teams. If they have that, we just don't have the ability to connect yet to the Teams for Enterprise. And then the next one is Skype Consumer. So if you do have clients that are using that, we have that ability to connect. So this is only for chat, meeting, and calling. So how to configure that in the admin center, just real quick. By default, it is open federation. This does not mean that you can connect to anyone. This is a handshake. This is a two-way street between you and a client to say, I want to connect to this client's domain. I have to go ahead and allow that domain, and they have to allow the domain. So it has to be a two-way street in this area in the Teams admin center where you say, I'm adding lawfirm.com and I'm adding client.com. So those is a handshake. So you can have it open, certainly, for everyone. It's kind of like I mentioned a phone call. You don't block people from calling people. It's the same scenario in my mind. You're not blocking anyone from chatting. It's kind of the same concept. But if you do need to have closed federation and very particular of who you want to have that chat capability with, you can do add and only allow certain ones and block all others, or the opposite where you're blocking specific ones. We don't want anyone to talk to this group. However, we're going to allow everyone else. So hopefully that's clear. We walked through the architecture, the anonymous access federation, which we now call external access. That's kind of enabling just open calling, which is kind of open chat to everyone. But now let's walk through what really I've been hearing firms asking for is how do we talk about or enable guest access in a way that considers our security and compliance requirements, our data or information governance and retention. So let's just talk about real quick, what are the capabilities of guest access? Guest access allows not just the communication, because remember, that's what you do when you want external access or federation. This allows both communication and collaboration with anyone outside of your organization, meaning that they're not on the payroll, they're not getting paid, they're not a part of your domain, and you grant them access to Microsoft Teams and specifically even to channels. What really makes up a guest? So a guest is someone who isn't an employee, like I said, not on the payroll, or even a member of your organization. They don't have a work account within your organization. So for example, guests may include clients, vendors, suppliers, or consultants that you're bringing in that you're going to work with. Maybe marketing has a design firm, you're redoing your intranet, and they want to do some collaboration. And instead of emailing those giant Photoshop files, let's just bring them in for this short period of time of the project. And once we're done, we'll go ahead and remove them. So really, frankly, guest is anyone not a part of your organization that you want added to Teams. But does guest need a license? I've had this question from firms as well, thinking that they need to actually increase their licenses, when in fact, the guest does not need a license at all because they're licensed within their homed tenant. So guest access is included if you do have M365 business or enterprise subscriptions. Teams does not restrict the number of guests that you can add. However, there is a max, a total number of guests that can be added to your tenant that might be restricted by your paid features of Azure AD. Let me just extend that a little bit to talk to you about, there used to be a ratio that one licensed person would get 5 guest licenses to use. So that means, for instance, if you had 10 licensed users, you would get 50 guest users for free. We have increased that. I think the number is like a max of 50,000 over the last few months, just realizing the amount of demand for being able to bring in guests to do more collaboration. So I would definitely, if you're considering guest access, reaching out to your account manager, just talking through what does that mean, and if there's any concerns around maxing that out. But again, when you invite a guest, you do not apply your own licenses to them. So what does a guest need to log in? Anyone with a business account. So that means they have to have Azure Active Directory or a consumer email account. This can be Outlook, Gmail, whatever is needed needs to have some sort of authentication that you I guess they provide you to be able to come into Azure Active Directory and participate as a guest in Teams with the full access of Teams and channel experiences. However, I will talk to you about how you can limit them. So some of the considerations that you need to think about as you're bringing in or considering clients coming in, along with your attorneys leaving and going into other locations as a guest, is there's a couple ideas here. You can allow users in your Azure Active Directory to be invited as a guest. The same thing is true for client Azure Active Directory systems. They can invite attorneys to come in and do collaboration. It does increase productivity, but of course it does come with certain risk around having the guest users be exposed inside of your tenant. So you have to consider what you want to allow them and really block from them that they can do. So you can have an allow and deny list that can limit guest access, like I mentioned, to specific domains. You can limit it to a specific team of people. Maybe you want to trial it with one practice group that's going to work with clients, and that's, you want to just contain it there for a proof of concept. And then of course you have auditing that you can enable. What you see here on the screen is that the team itself will show that it does have guests. So there's an indicator there. When they get added to Teams, you'll see in parentheses guest, as well as on the right-hand side in a team, we're saying how many guests are in there. So we're trying to show you in multiple ways that this truly is a guest. Tread lightly, be careful, understand what you can and can't do or say, and just be considerate. So why use guest access? This really provides the ability to collaborate on documents and channels, having chats, using applications, by still maintaining complete control over your corporate data. All guests and teams are covered by the same compliance and auditing. For instance, one recommendation, I have some more here later on. If you do decide to bring guests in here, enable an MFA. They cannot come in without using MFA. Another one would be, let's restrict them from downloading files. You don't want them taking files out of your system and putting them somewhere else. So we're going to talk to how we can set that up. Can we control what guests see? That's exactly what I'm talking about here. There's multiple ways in the Teams Admin Center. You can control the features that guests can get. There's other ways as a team owner that you can control these features. So let me also step back and talk to you. We've talked about anonymous access. That's just a meeting. We've talked about external access federation. That's really just opening up your phone system, but in this case, chat, to be able to just text someone. There's other ways that you can share. Prior to Teams, which Teams is only 4 years old, prior to that, there were firms that were using SharePoint Online for an extranet, or even SharePoint on-prem. And what they were doing is using either collaborating with clients in a document, so just sharing a link out, and that was either utilizing OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online. So if that's all you need, one document, or the next one being you want an extranet, a full-on extranet, so a SharePoint Online site for just a specific client, and you just want to share that document library. You don't want to enable the communication portion, being able to have conversation. You can do that as well. That's kind of what I've seen as a trend, going from a document to a site to now full on utilizing Teams with guest access. So that's it, really enabling, again, the collaboration, the SharePoint side, and the communication, the exchange side, to have chats, file collaboration, meetings, all in one location. And of course, if external sharing is disabled for your organization, guest access in Teams will also be disabled. So in understanding that, you need to, in the SharePoint area, if you're going to share a file, you need to enable that capability. And I will walk through that too. So here's where you, in the Teams Admin Center, control the guest experience. Within the org-wide settings, you either have it on or off. If you want to connect to one client, you need to have this on, and then I'll talk through how you lock it down in all the areas you don't want them to be. Honestly, it's a PowerShell script that goes through all of your teams and just turns off guest access.
So Michelle, when you show that, I mean, there was one question in the chat about quickly telling which teams have guests with assigned access. That's obviously something of interest, but one of the questions I've heard a lot in other conversations we've had is about having different settings for different external users.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that that gets into the conversation, because we hear that a lot.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. And we're going to go through, like, what is the difference? What do they get? What do they not get? And what you can apply and what you can't, what you can apply specifically to a specific group, a specific person, or even a specific domain. So that's really around conditional access. That's going to be, I think, getting to your point, Joy, about that different experiences. So just a little bit ago, in the admin center, you can control the guest capabilities. This is at the tenant level, meaning at the organizational level. So if I use tenant, just interchange that with organization. In the guest access, you can see it's on or off. When you turn it on, now you have some other things at the organizational level that you can allow or disallow. But then within each team, you can also either allow guests to create and update channels or allow guests to delete channels. So you're going to maybe probably want to put some controls in place as a governance team, really, to decide what are the use cases in our firm about what we're getting requested and how do we want to control it. So out of the box, there are limitations for guests. Business. I hope you all know why. They are not licensed in your organization. They're licensed in their organization. So if they have OneDrive, if they don't, it doesn't really matter. That is in their own system, which also means they can't upload a file to a person-person chat because they do not have OneDrive to upload from. They can't do a people search outside of Teams. They cannot calendar, schedule meetings, or look at meeting details. They do not have PSTN, which means phone, so they can't use your phone. I understand they're coming over. I kind of think of external, and that hopefully is a good analogy for everybody to remember. External access or federation is I am on my driveway and I'm waving at my neighbor and we're having a talk and maybe we have a fence, right? I am able to communicate to him. I can see him. It's great. Guest access is I invited him over and now we're talking in my yard, or I can even invite him into my room. And if you think of my house as all the different security and compliance features that I can lock down, maybe I only let him into my front door. Everything else is locked. And that's what you need to think about in all the Microsoft 365 security tools is I can lock all that and I can only allow one thing. So PSTN, he cannot use my phone. He can't see my organization chart. So if they were trying to figure out who is the practice group chair, I'm not sure why they wouldn't be able to. They can't create a team. They can't revise a team. And they can't even browse for a team. So if you're concerned as maybe a client comes in or an attorney leaves, they can't actually do too much outside, or inside of your house. They only get access to a team that they can't go and find anything else that's out there. There's no ability for them to browse. So I'm going to get a little technical for a second. Hopefully no one will mind. Currently, Teams supports only state 1 of Azure AD Active Directory. In state 2, let's see, types of guest users as defined by Azure B2B. So Azure B2B is business to business, and that's really what guest access is. We just don't call it that as much. We just call it guests. But what we're doing is we're creating a business to business relationship in our Azure Active Directory where we're allowing their identity to authenticate and come in and be a guest user in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. So real quick, you have here, I'm going to grab my laser pointer. You have a user. These are everyone that's in Azure Active Directory. That syncs down, of course, to Active Directory if you have that enabled. You have these members. These are going to be all your employees. Meaning they are coming from an external Azure Active Directory account. They already have M365, for instance, in their organization. They already have that type of identity, and we allow them in to Teams through that way. Or they have a Microsoft account, meaning they have maybe Outlook, like we mentioned. So those are the 2 types that we allow that comes into the external directory in Azure Active Directory and can be a guest. Reason why this is important is that then we can put security layers and conditional access on what they can see, what they can do, when they can come in. So all those capabilities are because of these 2 types of accounts. So to summarize, a guest is provisioned in the hosted tenant's Azure Active Directory. Access is given to an individual, unlike federation, where it's given to the domain as a whole. And what they get allowed to do is having a channel discussion, collaborate on files, connect using your apps. It gives that ability for chat and calling. Now, importantly, and this is why I've underlined this, is it requires the user to switch tenants in the Teams client. So if you can see here, I've got Contoso is the client that Danielle is a part of. However, if she needs to go and do some collaboration, she actually has to switch and she has to go to Northwind. So it's much like just switching, I guess, switching your account that shuts down one system and opens up the same system, but under that guest identity. And there's some future things that are happening where you will not have to do that. That won't be rolled out until about June. And that's called Microsoft Teams Connect. And that's using shared channels. So that's in the future. But currently, this is how you need to, as a guest, be able to switch between accounts. And then there is some considerations here. Just tenant coexistence mode will affect guest experience. So if you know that you are in islands mode, there might be some nuances to how the guest and the home tenant user can connect. So just a quick comparing, you will definitely have these slides. I don't want to drain them. This talks through again, what is an external access user, meaning somebody who's federated to you, or a guest user. What are those differences? The strong one here is that if they are federated, they don't have access to Teams, so therefore they cannot connect with files. The only way that you can connect with files through somebody you're federated with, you're going to have to use email to send files and then send files back. Yep. And then of course, some other things out of office, and then blocking someone in another organization. And here's some deeper ones. Like I said, I don't want to drain the slide, but this is really great to know the differences of what they can and can't do, what they can and can't see. So important for your security team to be able to evaluate this, understand the differences, and make decisions based on how you want them to be able to access a tenant, whether it's your own attorneys going out or the other way around. So high level, I'm not going to drain these. I'm going to go fast because I want to have discussion. I just want to talk to you about Azure Active Directory and why you can trust it. Talking about the largest cloud identity service and how many active users we currently have. how it's also engineered for availability and security. I'm not sure if all of you know, I have had a firm that didn't really realize how global we really are. We do have 100 data centers across the planet, and they're each are physical data centers that have multi-layer protection. If you haven't seen Paul Edlin's discussion on all the things that we do to protect the data centers, go and check that out. I think that's on the ILTA YouTube channel today. And then what is that? How do we connect? So the sign-on process, and I'll walk through what that invitation process is, but when a guest will sign on coming into your tenant or the other way around, in Azure AD, you get these capabilities called conditional access. This is where you can require MFA, you can limit access, you can do some monitoring of the access while you're going out to Outlook, SharePoint, Teams, and even utilizing, of course, Office, Word, PowerPoint, etc. So securing your apps, this is really about conditional access. And I'm just showing you a slide real quick to talk to you about how you would create conditional access specifically to users, and you can check mark guests. So this is where you can really go into detail and say, all guest users will have this experience. There's some other capabilities that I'm going to go into as well around guest access reviews that I think are just absolutely a requirement for firms to use if they want to start tracking, monitoring, and managing guest access as you do enable and as this grows. So let's go ahead and talk about authorization. I'm going to talk to you about how you enable guest access. There are 4 levers, and these levers are how you enable the authorization settings across the M365 workloads. You're doing it in Azure Active Directory because you're creating B2B. You're doing it in Teams, like you've seen, to just go ahead and click the toggle switch, but then do some configuration. You're going to have to do that in the Microsoft 365 groups, where you're controlling the experience, whether you are allowing a team owner or just the IT admin or everyone to invite the guests to come in. And then, of course, you need to check your sharing controls in SharePoint and OneDrive to enable file collaboration. So I'm going to go into each one of these, and then we'll talk through the considerations for your scenarios of how you want to control the authorization and invitation process to allow clients or other vendors and so forth into your tenant. First one here, in Azure Active Directory, this is how you are going to walk through the guest user access. You can have the guest user have the same amount of access as members. This would be the most inclusive. There is the second one there that's limited access, and this is really choosing that option if you'd like guests to see membership of all non-hidden groups. And then, of course, you have restricted access. In restricted access, you get, when the guest user is restricted, guests can view only their own profile. Permissions to view any others is not allowed. And it also restricts guests from seeing memberships of groups they're in. And if they're in a team, the client won't be able to see the list of all the attorneys, for instance, that might be in there. The next one is around the invite settings. There are several options. And as a matter of fact, the screenshots that you see here, I actually had to grab this past Sunday, just a couple of days ago, because it changed from Friday. So we keep adding to the way that you can put controls around the invite process and the enablement process for guest users. As you can see here, there's about 4 or 5 methods for allowing the invitation. You can either be inclusive, where everyone at the law firm can invite guests. You may not want to start off with that. You may want to have a little medium comfortability. For instance, we've created a guest inviter role, meaning you could have maybe the practice group chairs are in the guest inviter role, and they're the ones who control, as an attorney has to go to the chair to request that you have a certain client and it gets approved. So they would be in the guest inviter role, and admins, and of course, maybe opening up to members can invite. So choosing this option allows admins and members in the guest inviter role to invite your guests. Third one there is all about only admins and users in the guest inviter role can invite. It's the least inclusive, where guests are managed by the admin and the inviter role. So no more members. Again, that's the scenario I said. Practice group chair is in the guest inviter role, and you have an admin. So only those two groups are able to allow or invite guests. You could simply turn off invitations altogether. It's the most restrictive, which that just means you won't have guest access. And then we also have the bottom portion there is around self-service sign up. So this is really using automation that guests can use. You can have one person who is a guest from a client that you're bringing in. Maybe they're in the guest inviter role, but then you're managing this all through automation and approval process, which that's also ideal. One that I didn't mention on here is that you can, of course, block it all the way to where only the IT admin is the one who's going to be getting the request to go ahead and do those invitations. So there's different degrees and different ways that you can control how the guest invitation process occurs. And last but not least is the collaboration restrictions within Azure Active Directory, meaning all invitations, one, could be sent to any domain. You can deny invitations to specific domains. So like we talked about with enabling teams for a domain or blocking, this is also that capability. So allowing invitation only to a specific domain. So you can set this up instead of, I'm going to only allow this client, but we keep on having other people from the client that also needs to come in. Let's just open it up to the domain. And so that's what you're seeing here. Okay, so in lever one, which we're still in Azure Active Directory, we can do some things, which is blocking guests from some teams. So hopefully I'm going to get to the questions that everyone might have in their head, and that you mentioned, Joy, around the scenarios. So you have, some granular controls that you can do to block and restrict access. Like I mentioned, from one guest to a domain to an IT managed, or to open it up to all members. You can enable sensitivity labels. And what I mean by that is you can have what's called sensitivity labels. We used to call it classification, data classification. So high, medium, low. You can actually create a label called highly sensitive, put in a conditional access policy that denies any guest from getting access to a team that is labeled highly sensitive. So that's one way. Another way, you can control guest access from specific teams. You can invite specific external users from a specific domain. You can enforce multi-factor authentication. So they cannot come in, in that drop down in Teams and go into a different tenant without having an authentication, whether that's maybe on their mobile device, to be able to come inside of your system. And as I think equally important, if you do not and you want to restrict file download, file print from a guest, you can do that too, enabling guest access, but block file download externally through external or through conditional access. All right, so let's move on to lever two. This is where we're going to control guest experience in Teams. Earlier I mentioned it's a toggle switch. When you go ahead and turn it on, all these other pieces in the Teams Admin Center are enabled for you. And it's for you to review what you want the guest experience to be. So for instance, you might want to say, I don't want guests to make private calls, or you don't want guests to be able to meet now. So that's just one switch. The other pieces here are, as you enable, you have calling, meeting, and messaging capabilities. You may have a reason to turn off chat. Maybe you want them to come in, but you don't want them to chat at all. You may want to restrict some of the other capabilities like memes or stickers. So just to let you know, that is e-discoverable, but you have an option to turn it off as well. All right, so the third lever, that's controlling guest experience through the Microsoft 365 group settings. This is located in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. It is in the organization settings, and there's only two check marks. but it's important to note they do different things. If you don't have these checked, therefore SharePoint will, or the files tab in Teams will be completely turned off. So there's let group owners add people outside your organization. That must be checked if you want the team owner to be able to invite a guest. If you do not want them to, you have to uncheck that. So this is all about which direction you want to go for your team's guest provisioning process. And then if you want them to see the SharePoint files, you have to make sure that's checkmarked. If it is not, then they're just going to come when they go to the files tab, they're going to go to an error page. So that's the third lever. The fourth lever is about controlling the experience in SharePoint and OneDrive. So this is anyone. This is the first portion is you want to be as inclusive as possible and share files and folders with anybody unauthenticated. That's definitely not a recommendation for guest access. I think the second one is probably going to give you exactly what you need because you're going to probably be inviting new people and also want to maintain the file access for existing guests. So that's the one that you would go ahead and enable. And then if you don't want to invite anyone new, of course, you can just do existing guests and then organization only. So this is all the way, they're really levers that slide up and down. SharePoint is the primary that controls because SharePoint, because OneDrive for business is actually SharePoint under the covers. SharePoint just happens to be for a team. OneDrive is for one single person and each person within your company. Then you have more external sharings here. You can do things like time box. You can say you need a verification code. You only get this X amount of time to see the file. Then of course you have conditional access on there that basically says you can't download it and you can't print it. And here we're saying you only can see it for this amount of time. And so if you don't click on it, you're going to have to request access to that again. So there's certain guardrails within SharePoint and OneDrive to also consider. So those are the four levers. And really the experience is the owner gets an invite, Azure B2B connects, and the guest goes ahead and redeems. So if you think of this just as an invitation, you're hitting a join, it's doing the authentication with the home tenant identity, and then going in and redeeming and connecting. This is a more architectural overview of how it all sits between invitation and redemption. I'll spare you walking through it. I think you can all, as you saw the four levers, you can assume that it first has to check to make sure, are you a guest in our Azure Active Directory? If not, then you'll be denied. If you are, okay, let's move on to say, do you have content or access to content? Now let's move you through the authentication. And we've got SharePoint that will light up and then guest access to apps and tabs. All these are different locations that we walk through with the levers. And there are certain periods in the decision process where you will be denied or allowed. And that will be an experience, that'll be your experience. I'm not sure if I actually need to share volume, but I do have a quick 2-minute video on this. I may just come back, circle back with Joy and provide a link on the join process here.
Yeah, I think that would be good, Michelle.
Okay. And this is just being back. So talking through the credentials, I would definitely, the terminology here is about replace partners with clients or consultants or whatever, but any user can easily come in a secure process. And what we found the benefits to be is certainly no external management overhead. You don't have to manage accounts whatsoever. We manage that for you. And then we also have now rolled out what's called Azure AD access reviews. This is the ability to efficiently manage group memberships and access to application role assignment, but more importantly, who are the guests within your tenant, so you can manage them effectively and not be doing this on a one-off. It's a really streamlined way to enable organizations to really manage who has what kind of access. There's a great video on that I'm not going to get into, but I would recommend if you're going down the path of guest access and thinking through as it scales, how do you scale as IT to manage the review process, making sure you're removing guests if you need to. Maybe the team owner didn't tell you, but to really manage who inside your system has access and to what. So that's a pretty great overview. They're all about 4 minutes long. We'll make sure we get those added. So just a couple more things to consider here. What you can do with the guest access, allowing and blocking your business to business clients, partners, is that you can do it by specific domain. And you can, block specific organizations by tenant domain. You can set up an allow list or a deny list. So that's where you can really block specifically if you don't want someone in there. This is independent. So within SharePoint and OneDrive, you also need to make sure you are blocking domains if you're blocking domains at the tenant level. And then list doesn't apply to users who already have been redeemed. So if you've already have guests inside of your tenant today, just know that you're going to have to go back and clean up the existing guests. I highly recommend, if you do not have this or are aware of this, if you do want to enable guest access, we do have a terms of use. The terms of use can actually be used internally as well. So you can have, when you first load up Teams, you can have a contract that has to be signed. So I highly recommend putting together some great terminology, some great, before they get access, or even, from any device or on a reoccurring schedule every 6 months, they have to agree to utilizing or coming inside of your team and collaborating. So you can also present it in different languages, and you can see a list of who has or hasn't accepted, and then a log of terms. So we, of course, in our compliance center, our security compliance center, we audit everything, and we would be auditing this as well. So if you haven't checked it out, I would definitely recommend looking through that. Here's the audit logs I was referring to. So we can go ahead inside of Team, we can go ahead and look at all the user activity in the audit logs, including who signed the terms of use. And I think that's pretty standard capability. That's the old fashioned CRUD. We are tracking everything that's been created, anything that's been read, anything that's been updated, and anything that's been deleted. So that can all be managed there. And then just a couple more slides left is really about guest access, the benefits. This really enables beyond email, a safe teamwork outside your firewall, working with any email address, so you don't have to do any configuration or create any accounts. And it's based on what's been utilized for years with Azure B2B. And then the guidance. We've talked through how to govern. That's allowing and blocking different domains, ensuring you have terms of use, do your access reviews to have governance over who is in your tenant, and then tracking that guest user activity. So no matter what a guest does, you are actually tracking that in an audit log. So if you need to look that up and to say, what was client A, what did they change, when did they update this file, that's all being tracked. So this is really about the policies for guest access. There's a few ways I've seen it go from the gamut of being able to be self-service site creation, all the way to only the IT is allowed to, create the guest account and enable federation. So that's what this is showing here. You can allow it and have a guest inviter role that's user managed that everyone can be a part of. You can do it by domain or at the group level. So you can really restrict. It's as granular really as you want it to be. A couple more teams and security and compliance. I know I'm not going to dive deep into this. Paul will take this on. I believe it's next week on really the considerations of what you should have in place when you want to start opening up the collaboration communication portion. But at a high level, there's group expiration policies. We have retention, channel retention, as well as file retention. Of course, we can put DLP all over everything. Conditional access, enforcing MFA if you have a guest coming in. Let's restrict the risk and reduce any type of data breach by putting as many layers as we can, as well as you can archive a team, restore it if you need to, add some sensitivity labels. Remember, blocking teams that have a sensitivity label from guests even getting access. And remember, they can't browse and they can't just join a team. You have to be invited to that team. And I'll show you a demo of what that looks like. And of course, we do have then information barriers. So here's the conditional access I talked about. We, are going through our policy, creating a policy and saying, for all the cloud apps, we're going to grant access. However, to these guests, we are going to enable MFA. And of course, what we recommend, any admin within your organization today should already have MFA. This just is an extension to say guests should too. This is what it looks like. Just an example. So you're saying all guests and external users from any location, you must require MFA. And that's the only way they're getting in. And last but not least, and I know it was a little bit of a whirlwind, I can't wait to open up for dialogue, just privacy in teams. So as a customer, you own and you control your own data. You also control what your guests can see, what they can get access to, what they can take away, as well as what you want to and how you want to restrict how they get to your data. So I just wanted to make sure that you all understand that. We do have an Office 365 Trust Center that walks through a lot of that guidance. So from here, I'm happy to join into some questions, but I also have a little demo to just show you what the experience looks like if you have not done federation or guest access.
So before we jump into the demo, we had a lot of slides, which I think were good because based on the questions I'm seeing in the chat, there were gaps. And so now I think everyone's got a good baseline, but I want to make sure that we have a good amount of time for discussion. So as I said, one of the use cases I hear about a lot is more granularity, different things with different clients. I've also heard discussions around what if a client invites you to join their team's environment. I want to make sure that we're fleshing out all of these use cases that people are encountering, that this kind of broad was fairly detailed overview maybe didn't cover. So either please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat so that Michelle can comment on it.
Actually, I'll chime in and give Michelle a breather, Joy, if you don't mind on both of those for a minute. Michelle,
Sure.
Feel free to add. There's two things to think about from that outside in perspective. One thing that we typically recommend is if you want to have different types of profiles of guests, is you can actually use a function built into Azure Active Directory called dynamic groups, and you can actually build those groups based on a property such as the domain suffix. So, for instance, if we wanted to create a dynamic group for netrixllc.com, you can create that and then actually target that group with your conditional access policy. And it doesn't have to be just one. There may be different stages of access and rights. And if you route that through things like CASB, but you can define those in kind of your layered conditional access policies on that front. So it's a really handy feature that's built in without having to kind of proactively manage static groups, which we've all done for the better part of 25 years, and does make that job a little bit easier. I'll also call out on that latter scenario you just mentioned, Joy, was what about that scenario where you're a guest accessing another team? One thing that I think it's super important to note that from an identity flow perspective, any rules that your organization enforces around a source application like Teams, like if your organization requires an MFA challenge or be on a corporate device in order to access your Teams tenant, that is always attested to before it then goes out and sends your essentially authentication token over into the other tenant, and then their rules may apply. It is important to note this because in some scenarios, if you do require MFA in yours and the customer or business partner also requires an MFA challenge, you may actually have to respond to 2 different MFA challenges as a part of that. It just depends on what the posture is on both sides. But it is super important to note that your tenant settings around things like conditional access will always apply before then sending that authentication package over into the other tenant. Hopefully that helps some folks if you haven't been through that before.
Appreciate that, Rich.
Sure.
Just trying to make sure if there's anything in the chat we need to cover. Bo talks about time-based capabilities on encrypting a document after X number of days or revoking access after X number of days.
Yeah, that's what cloud app security. I mean, that's another, I mean, it's an add-in for Microsoft, or if you have E5, you've got it. But in my opinion, it just gives you so much flexibility and lets you deal with kind of, I think a lot of people have all these concerns about, oh, someone's going to misshare something or share something that they didn't mean to share. And, they've been sharing this file for 3 years. We should revoke that ability and pull that file back in. And cloud app security gives you those capabilities. And I really think people should explore that a little more.
Agreed. And Paul might even talk to that next week too.
Yeah,
Thanks
I'm sure he will. And Roz put in the chat something about Azure information protection as well.
Right. Yep. And I think I talked to that. That's the sensitivity labels.
Yeah, I mean, that's what cloud app security uses. It applies those sensitivity labels from AIP, and it does it automatically. So you can set up rules, or I don't know. I'll stop talking, but that's.
Well, no, we don't want anyone to stop talking, Bo. That's the point. We want to share some ideas here about things that we maybe could be doing or should be doing, and so.
Yeah, and I know that I had a heavy front load, but I felt it was important to at least cover baseline to really understand the different types of ways that you would interact with a client. And now it's around decision making. And I think this is the best time to have the dialogue of which routes you are considering and what concerns you might have.
Yeah, I'll add one quick comment to the last thing as well. So, it's always about a layered approach. So a lot of what was in the chat just a few minutes ago and what we were talking about is identity based, but I think it's also a great point out for the sensitivity labels and Azure information protection and MCAS, because those are layers in which you can actually apply protection to the content, which that's really critical, because regardless of where that content ends up, whether it's a USB drive, a customer tenant, whether it end up in some Ignite server overseas, that content, that protection will always follow the content. So as Michelle has kind of gone through different areas throughout today, it's definitely about the multi-layered approach. They are all important in their own right when it comes to securing the users, your guest users, or the content itself.
Well, and feel free to keep having a dialogue. I have, hopefully you're still seeing my screen. I just want to show you what it does look like to move between one tenant to another as you go ahead and invite a client into your system.
Yep, and we can see it, Michelle, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I am Nestor on the left-hand side, as you can see here. And I have an external, this is labeled specifically by my admins to note that this is an external guest team. And within here, I have invited Megan, who is a client. So I'm going to show you, if I go to manage team, I've got 3 owners and I have Megan here. So Megan is a client, Megan Bowen, and I've invited her in here. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see this is Megan. And she's in her own tenant. So if you can see the difference of the teams here, they're very different because they're 2 separate organizations. And so if Megan wants to go ahead and chat with Nestor using external access or federation, she can do that from here. She does not have to leave. So she can go ahead and say, hi, Nestor, how are you? And this is that enablement, like I mentioned, you can call anyone. And this is federations, like I can now chat with anyone. So I can come up here. It looks like Megan, this is Nestor's team's client, just got a notification that Megan had, in fact, sent a chat. So right here, he can go ahead and see, and he can respond. They did not leave their tenant. They're just in two separate organizations having a conversation. So that's like opening up your phone system to everyone, being able to, I'm sorry about that, being able to just have a one-way dialogue. We can also have a meeting. So I can go ahead, I can call him, I can make an audio call or even a video call. So that's just using VoIP, voice over IP, to have a meeting. So we can do that and we can connect. Now, let's just go back to the team, and I'm in my external client channel, and Megan, we know, is a team member in here. If Megan wants to come over here, she's going to have to change tenants or organizations. So she is Contoso, she's a client. She needs to come over to the Contoso law firm in order to go into that particular team and channel. And that's where she can do file collaboration. She can have conversations. So as that switches, you're going to see something pretty unique. It's a completely different experience. So if I go into Teams, see how she only has 4 things on the side rail. She does not have access to a phone system. So much like I said, no PTSN, no apps, but she only has access to one team and only one channel, because that's all that Nestor has over here. If Nestor were to create a private channel for just the practice group and not included her, then again, she would only see one channel. So as you can see here, now she's in here, she can go ahead, she can have a new conversation, but she is out of her own organization. And Nestor's in here, got hello. And now we can go ahead and we can do some co-authoring. We can open up files. We can both be in. We're going to go ahead and look at and review the engagement letter. We can both be in here simultaneously in different spots. So this just goes back to the value of why you would bring in a guest, is doing some of that co-authoring. I go ahead and put my cursor here, and then I will put you can see that he's in here. You can see what line he is on. So this is just a natural part of co-authoring on Word, Excel, PowerPoint, because the files are stored in SharePoint or in OneDrive for Business. So let's just say now they're done. They can go out of here. And if they wanted to meet now, they could certainly do that too. So here again, the video camera is just, let's go ahead and let's meet between Megan and Nestor, really creating that capability. And if there's any other files, for instance, you could have a OneNote notebook as a tab that could be shared with Megan to keep track of the schedule. Maybe there's a court case and having the schedule in here to be able to come in, see what's on the docket for the day. And then when she's done, she can go back into her own tenant or organization. So that's really what the difference of the federation or external access versus guest access looks like. Are there any questions?
Michelle, I just put a comment in the chat, but I think it's probably worth addressing with the bigger group. You know, there's kind of a push-pull with co-authoring. There's a lot of interest in it. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of concern about understanding where the document management system fits in the conversation, sure, and then who ultimately has custody of the document. That right. is, you know, whose environment does it quote unquote sit in, and mm-hmm. who has jurisdiction over that document. I mean, I think law firms, of course, like to own the documents that are produced in a matter, and in some cases the client wants to own them. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Joy. You know, it's depending on the law firm, they're doing things a little bit differently. Some are having all their documents in their DMS, and then they're using some integration tool that will export the file, put it into Teams for a duration of time, and then check it back in, going back is leveraging storage of SharePoint and OneDrive, but still being able to open it up using the capabilities for co-authoring. That's one method. Another method I've seen is that, you know what, we are actually going to create a team for every client matter. And if it's a large matter, that's going to be a separate team. We are going to first have our files living within the document management system, and then coming into, as the case gets created and as things start building out, those files are going to live within Microsoft Teams. And they're still determining now if they really want it to go back to cold storage or just use Teams archive settings and records retention within SharePoint. So there's different methodologies I've seen, Joy, on the way you use it. But we are working, and we've probably mentioned this several times, we're working with NetDocs, we're working with iManage, several different other partners out there to bring in your document management system into Teams. So if you wanted to continue to use that, that's so important to note, that you can add a tab on any team that connects you out to your document management system. So that's just about authentication and putting an iframe around what you already are using today. So making it seamless for you to come in, utilize Teams, but still use your DMS system that you've already been using. We're also seeing, and I don't know how much I can share, but I know there's apps being worked on that can come into the Microsoft Teams store that is really your DMS system. So on the side rail, you would actually be able to connect that way. What it means for co-authoring, Joy, I'm not positive if the DMS partners are bringing in co-authoring in that regard, or if they need to be stored first in the check-in, check-out type of experience and go back into that DMS system.
But that's certainly an important question to ask the DM vendors when people are interacting with them.
Correct. Yep.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. What issues would you have expected that we would cover today or get questions about that we haven't? And this is not only to Michelle, but to everybody else.
Hey, Michelle, it's Kevin Stoneham at King & Spalding. Thanks a lot for today's overview. We've been working a lot on Teams since the beginning of the pandemic, and even beyond that, I learned a lot from the presentation today, so that's good. We've done an extensive internal deployment and are just contemplating and beginning to do some more what I'd call technical pilots of what guest access looks like. So incredibly well-timed session as well.
Perfect.
One of the things that we're trying to figure out is to what degree are there differences between a guest that we would invite who is also coming from a Microsoft O365 Azure AD enabled environment, and then one that is not, in terms of, you know, how we manage those users, whether we even know ahead of time when we invite somebody based on their email address, what status they're going to be in, and then kind of what features apply. We love the idea that if we invite somebody from a you know, kind of a full-fledged Microsoft environment, then a lot of those protections around the, you know, the currency of the account, whether the person has left the employment of that client, all of those kind of things are sort of taken care of for us, because the identity's over there on the, or, you know, it's linking, if you will, to the client's environment. For those that are not, you know, how do we detect that? Which features are different? Do we need to do additional things around MFA, all those kind of things? So do you have many other clients that are starting to try to understand how the identities are differentiated between the types of guests that they have and what kind of accounts they're coming from?
I have that, a guest is a guest is a guest in my understanding, and maybe Rich might have some more deeper knowledge here, but a guest, whether they're an Azure Active Directory or they're using a Hotmail account, when they come into your tenant, the user type is just guest. And so you can put all the access restrictions that you want over just guest, no matter that backend. But I'll let Rich chime in too.
Yeah, just a couple of things to note on that. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if you know about guests, I'm not gonna get deep in the weeds on what's called a viral tenant these days, but if your business partner or customer has a synced directory today, that also means that their identities are governed typically by their Active Directory and then synced Azure AD environment. There are obviously opportunities where a tenant doesn't exist, where those viral users, those users get created what's called a viral tenant. So if you did have a customer that had maybe 25 people, there's a takeover process for that viral tenant once they do start to synchronize their directory. But that does leave open a time where that identity can be, today, this moment, leverage a, just an MSA account or a Microsoft account, essentially. In these scenarios, you do have to be somewhat careful because obviously that's not going to be governed by the customer's identity platform. Therefore, they get termed and they still have access to that account. It is a potential risk. So on that note, I do recommend, as Michelle talked about earlier, and I put some details in the chat around regular access reviews to prevent that, and even delegating that to a customer owner who would review that on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to help limit that. There's also a little known announcement that was made that I just put in chat that starting this year in October, Microsoft's not going to support the redemption of invitations by unmanaged Azure AD accounts and tenants. This is a really critical change because this will forcefully, need a synchronized identity, and it does help reduce the risk of these types of scenarios. One other thing I do also recommend, since it sounds like you're kind of more on the mature side of this, is start looking at your business contracts with these vendors and business partners and start to build in assumptions and language that they do have, a governed identity platform today, ideally synchronized to Azure AD, and then start to work that back into your existing relationships, and then obviously, net new moving forward, because it, will be important from an overall identity governance perspective. Hopefully that gives you some ideas.
Great, thank you, Rich.
Sure.
Hey, other questions or use cases in our last couple minutes? Well, Michelle, I know will send me the slide deck, and I'll also have the recording, which we'll make in a YouTube link and make that available to everybody. Then we have our session next week. I'll put these links up on the G100 community of interest so everybody can see it. And Paul will be really, really deeply focused on the mechanics of kind of complex information governance applications here within Teams. So there's one other question I see there. Is there a way in Azure AD to expire a guest account after X days automatically?
I'm trying to think if you can expire a guest account or if you need to remove them. I don't.
So I'll answer really quick. So there are a couple of different ways to tackle that. So one is you can set up a group expiration policy on the M365 groups themselves. And obviously I would govern any members, including external, in that scenario. The other thing, I don't believe there's an expiration limit. Now, if there's an ID that's not redeemed, I believe that expires after, I can't remember if it's 7, 14, or 30 days. But that is one mechanism. The other is you can also build this into a logic app or a Power Automate runbook to be able to check the redemption dates against the specific dates. A little bit more of an advanced scenario, but also say that access reviews can do 100% of that as well. So you can actually set an entire access review on a group, and if it's not responded to, or if the manager or owner on your side is reviewing that on a monthly basis, you can have it automatically take action based on the results of that access lifecycle review.
Yeah, and where I got a little stuck too, Rich, because of the terms of access or the acceptance, T's and C's, can you also do it that way? I think the answer is yes. So if every 6 months you need to have clients go ahead and accept your terms of use for coming into Teams, if they do not, then they're blocked.
Yep, there's absolutely another way of doing that with conditional access.
Yep. Okay. Not necessarily expiration, but certainly I think answers the question. Oh, Joey, you're on mute.
Yeah, it's solving the problem. It's, it may not be that particular mechanism, but the idea of there being a regular way to get rid of accounts that shouldn't be there, right? It's it's kind of taking these protections that we've all put in of least possible access, accounts being cleared out regularly that we've been doing internally in our Active Directory environments and extending it out to the rest of the world, where we're right at the bottom of the time. I think this is very valuable. Michelle, thank you. Thank you for everybody who participated. And we'll have links and supporting materials available in the next day or so, and hopefully see many of you next week on our session with Paul Edlund. So thank you very much, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Joy, thank you,
Bye.
Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.